you're not just talking about the big movements. Like, I'm going to teach you guys how to jump, and then I'm going to teach you guys how to swing, and then I'm going to teach you guys how to run and then wrestle a little bit. It's also the act of making a fire is a movement. And it's not as much movement. And in the old paradigm, we're like, well, how many calories can you burn making a fire? But the bottom line is like, it's almost like thinking like you have a beautiful plate of food, and you have like macro food groups, like, you, let's say, mashed potatoes, and then you have like veggies and stuff like that. But then you have these smaller bits of spices. And I kind of feel like some of those other movements, and I mean, even just sitting in a sauna, like, these things are the spices of movement. But then it even goes even deeper than that. Like, the relationship of the recipes is kind of like what you're doing is you're also telling stories by the fire that you gathered, you lit on fire, you're sitting by it, you're singing, which is another form of storytelling. Movement is a form of expression. What I'm seeing behind all of this is you you're exposing deeper connections, because you said, the word spiritual. The most technical sense of the word spiritual is that which connects us all, and not just us humans, but that which connects us all. And to me, that's the environment. And a lot of people think I am this and the environment is that, yet we have these membranes, and like, our hands and our skin will eat of the outside world and allow certain things in and not other things. And you were even mentioning trees release phytochemicals, and what's in the soil release these things that can help lower anxiety and depression. And I don't think that's just like, oh, well, this is our new anti-anxiety thing, we need to find that one phytochemical. It's not about that reductionist mentality. It really is, instead of reducing it and disconnecting and isolating, it's reconnecting, and you're saying integrating it with what we always used to be. It's almost like our past. It comes from all of this. And I remember when I was going to the gym all the time way back in the day, and I remember that pull-up bar, I never had to question if it could hold me or not. I never had to question whether there was a broken branch that was a little spiky part on the blind side of it. So if I were to jump up and grab it, it would poke me in the hand. I never had to question those things. The ground was perfectly flat. It was bolted to, like, so I didn't have to use my mind. All I had to do was repeat a motion over and over and over again and hope that it would give me better vanity muscles, right? And so in that, the old paradigm of working out and getting fit was really deficient in a lot of these minerals that you're talking about. And I love how Katie Bowman, you mentioned, she has rocks, that she walks on instead of a mat. She has rocks that she walks on her way into the house, because she calls it vitamin texture.
Yeah.
And this isn't just something fancy to say. Literally, she goes into the science and shows that your talus, the ankle, and stepping on uneven ground actually sends a flood of new information up to the brain. And I don't want to go off into all the nuances, but what I love about what you're saying here is it reminds me of some of my favorite things that I learned from Paul Chek, from the Chek Institute. When he takes on a client, he'll have them work on their own personal myth, and then how to express that out through the body, how to allow your myth to be understood intellectually, for sure, but then also to let your body engage in your myth. And there was another thing that Aaron Alexander was talking about. We mentioned this right before the podcast, but I met him when I was out filming Aubrey Marcus. And Aaron Alexander just popped in at the very end of the interview, and we got to talking about movement. And at the end of it, I remember I was saying, I'm super into movement, I'm super into music, and I think dance and music and song will serve to help reconnect us to a part of us that has become deficient and atrophied for quite some time. And I'm not going to blame society. It's just something that we find ourselves in the midst of. But what I love about that is and so anyway, Aaron Alexander was like, isn't all movement a form of dance? It may be just kind of a distilled form of dance. It looks a lot more dry and not as poetic, but isn't all speaking? and noise making a form of music. And if you go back evolutionarily, like, maybe language came from the birds, human language came from the animal kingdom, and dance could have also been by seeing wildlife, seeing nature, and just observing nature in general. So, like, less of a question and more of just the way that I marvel at the work that you've brought forth and how I have taken that on in my life is really looking at these things of how can we start integrating more nuances, more nature, more dynamics in the way we move, not just as a way to make sure we burn the most calories and get the most fit and have the most robust neurology, but beyond that, it really is returning to source.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm feeling.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a few things I'd love to speak to there. I think of natural movement as a kind of permaculture of the body. Right? Katie Bowman has this term stacking, right? It's like, you don't want to multitask. You want to do something that stacks multiple benefits in one thing. And this is kind of like permaculture. It's like, what can I plant in one place that will synergize with each other? Yeah. And in order to do that, you have to think from a kind of systems perspective, right? That it's not just about the individual components of the system. It's about how all those things interact. And this is how ecologies work. Science has worked by reducing things, by taking things apart down to their smallest pieces. Right? We can go all the way back to the Greeks and the theory of the atom. Right? We can see that the foundations of science. We have this desire to break things down into their pieces. Even the word rationality, right? It comes back to the idea of cutting things into pieces to ratio something. So that's a powerful tool. Like, obviously it's given us this immense power. And we need to understand it and understand what it's how it works and where it's the appropriate tool. But we might also start to recognize that it limits us in certain ways and closes our vision in certain ways. So one of the things that is that we don't understand those ecological principles and nonlinearities very well from that reductionist standpoint. And so being able to start to think from a systems perspective, that's kind of the cutting edge of what's happening in cognitive science, in motor learning, in all of these areas. Complexity theory, that's where we need to go. Yeah. And it's the same thing in the human body, right? I think of the 80s as kind of like the peak of the reductionist approach to human physicality, right? It's like, this is when aerobics became popular, and like everyone believed you only needed to do aerobics in order to be healthy. And then this is the era of bodybuilding and body part, just like isolations. And it turns out this doesn't work well when you're trying to prepare someone to actually be able to do functional movement. And I don't think it works well in cultivating the human psyche or soul, right? So I do think that there's this necessity for something bigger that is a whole food approach to movement. And the role of dance in that is very interesting as well. I had a really interesting conversation with my friend Simon Thacker. If you haven't started following Simon, I highly recommend Simon. But I've had a number of conversations along this theme recently. But he's really interested in traditions of animal mimicry across the world. And so one thing that's really unique about a human being is that we mimic other animals. Like, if you watch wolves, they don't pretend to be deer or boar or whatever they hunt, right? Lions don't do that, but human beings do. And you see this all over the world, this capacity for mimicry, this incredible plasticity of the human nervous system. And,
John, do you give an example of that, of how like humans mimic animals?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there are dances. There's a deer dance. There's a wolf dance. There's a,
right,
et cetera, dance all over the world. Watch a small child.
True.
My kids do it all the time, right? We're puppies, right? That's my kid's favorite game right now is playing puppy. And we see it in the shamanic rituals all over the world. Mm-hmm. And so there's a beautiful, I think it's called The Great Dance. It's a documentary you guys can look up about Kung San persistence hunting. And you'll see that there's a point at which they are tracking the animal and they come across its tracks and they tell a story about what it's doing, and they act out to some degree how they believe that the animal moved. And what John Vervaeke is proposing, I don't think this is his proposal uniquely, I think other people have talked about this as well, is that shamanism is really a kind of a psychotechnology that allows us to better map the mind of the animal such that we can more effectively track it and hunt it. And it improves hunting success.
The first hour is past. The sun is like a fire overhead. The kudu are way ahead. He must read the tracks well. Underfoot, the sand burns like a second sun. As the second hour ends, the kudu are saying, "Who is this man? Always when we stop, he's there." Now Karoha is becoming kudu. No longer does he follow the tracks. He runs where they will run. He twists back where they will twist back. He runs among the thorns to chase them out of the shade. He drives them into the open. He does not slow down. He thinks of his family, who must eat meat. After 3 hours, he is close, but cannot see them. The day reaches the hottest. This is good. The kudu's blood will soon boil. Karoha must outrun his thirst. He is testing himself. Can I do this? Run with no bow or poison. Keep chasing with no rest. Only myself and my spears. For 4 hours he runs without stopping. One God has set aside is dead on her feet. Now Karoha is controlling her.
So we have these dances that allow us to sort of step outside of ourselves and take on these alternative states of consciousness that actually allows us to get inside the mind of an animal. So that's part of the origin of this. And other animals dance, but they dance primarily just as courtship, whereas dance has many other functions for human beings. Mm-hmm. And similarly for song, right? Songs for birds are to project their territory and to seek mates. But songs for human beings tell the story of the land, and they bond people, and they allow human beings, they're a powerful tool that allows human beings to become, this in a sense, eusocial. And other than naked mole rats, human beings are like the only thing among mammals that's approached eusociality, and that's what's allowed us to be so incredibly successful. So I think that if you say all movement is dance, then you've lost the category of dance, because the category of dance is just the category of movement, right?
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Dance is not my strongest suit, right? But it's something that we explore a lot in some of the conversations on my channel. I think people would get a lot out of it. So I'll leave that there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And, you know, one film, if you haven't seen it, I actually just hit Aaron Alexander up with this film, but it's free on YouTube, and it's from the 70s. It's called Dance in Human History.
Okay.
Check that out, because, and just for the audience and yourself to understand, like, Dance in Human History was really an anthropological look at cultures in different environments and how they developed dance and their, like, the different types of movements in dance. And so one would be where tribes had only developed wooden tools, such as in Africa, where if you had a wooden tool and you would do a lot of like scraping and things like that, but you couldn't do like a hammer throw or anything. It was a lot of their dance would actually be like up and down, jumping, and it would seem to kind of mimic that kind of movement. And then you go to stone tools, where you could actually start chopping and using the transverse abdominis type of movement, and you'll start to see those kinds of movements in their dance as well. And then the third was really liberating the top half of the body with a lot of spirality, and the bottom half around the pelvis. And these were the tribes that they focused a lot on, tribes around Indonesia and Asia, where there was a lot of water and a lot of waterways that would spiral around, and they would have dances that would actually kind of mimic the flow of water. And I just thought that was a pretty interesting look at the way that movement evolved from their tool usage all the way into their dance, and what they commemorated and what it kind of meant as of that point.
A holy dancer from Ceylon leads us into the spinning universe of dance, where both beauty and variety at first seem endless and bewildering. For every spoken language, there's an accompanying language of movement, each one carrying messages from the heart of a society. To understand the role of dance in human history, we must somehow decode these varied patterns of body language, of silent communication. These are folk dancers of Germany. These, whirling dervishes of Turkey. Ostrich dancers from the Andes. Funeral maskers from the Sudan. Americans at a Sunday afternoon love-in in Los Angeles. What have these different movement styles, each one apparently so unique and so irrational, what do they have to tell us about the history of culture?
Make sure y'all head over to benjosephstewart.com, become a member. You'll have access to the growing library of deeper dives where I talk about all the stuff that I really can't talk about on YouTube. Make sure you get involved in the Discord chat. That's where a lot of the conversation is happening, talking about new theories, being able to interweave into the greater conversation that is how we awaken infinity. That's our highest potential. And I just want to remind you, you are the most powerful technology ever known to creation. Wield it like an artist with a conscience.